Those who sacrifice themselves for the many receive an undying commendation and a most distinguished memorial, not at the physical place of their burial, but wherein their glory resides, for ever to be remembered every time one is called upon to speak or act in similar conduct. For to great men the whole of earth is a monument, and they are commemorated not by mere inscription on stone in their homeland, but also in distant lands by an unwritten remembrance in the mind of every person, which will survive longer than any man-made structure would.
The 2004 movie Troy is often regarded as a poor adaptation of the Iliad, especially by people who claim to be lovers of the classics, which has always struck me as odd because, as someone who was born and raised in Greece, has read the Iliad in the original ancient Greek language, and is generally quite well versed in ancient Greek history and its culture, the movie Troy has always been my favorite adaptation of ancient Greek mythology. Even though the plot deviates from the source material considerably, it manages to capture the essence and themes of ancient Greek storytelling remarkably well. Troy is basically a retelling of the myth of the Trojan War, with all explicit divine interference removed. In the Iliad, the gods participate in the war quite actively, constantly influencing the tide back and forth. All of those elements have been removed in the movie. In the intro, we are shown a wall of text, giving us some exposition on the geopolitics of Greece in the Bronze Age. Agamemnon is indeed credited for uniting the kingdoms of Greece under the Mycenaean Empire. Obviously, Agamemnon was not a historical figure, it's a myth. But the Mycenaean Empire was real, and it was indeed a highly militaristic, imperialistic, and hegemonical superpower. It mentions that only Thessaly has remained unconquered, which seems to be a fictional addition, and a bit confusing one at that. During the events of the movie, Achilles is already fighting under Agamemnon, but Achilles was from Thessaly. His elderly father, Pylaeus, was the king of Phthia, which was in Thessaly. So if Thessaly is unconquered, why is Achilles fighting under Agamemnon? Of course, Thessaly was a large province with many kingdoms, not just one, so maybe Phthia had been conquered, but not the rest of Thessaly. It's a bit confusing, but doesn't really matter. It's just a plot device to introduce the main characters. Menelaos was indeed Agamemnon's brother and the king of Sparta. Please note that this Sparta is the Bronze Age Sparta, not the Sparta of the Classical Age that most people are familiar with. They are like 1,000 years apart and have almost nothing in common. The term Greek nation can be a bit misleading. Nations as we understand them today did not exist back then. But the term ethnos, which literally translates to nation, did exist as a concept, and it was used to refer to traits like language, religion, and customs, not centralized governments or clearly defined territorial borders. So while the area of Greece was fragmented in multiple kingdoms and dialects, all these civilizations were regarded as Greek because they shared these traits. However, they didn't always use the term Greek to describe themselves. Achilles was indeed considered to be the greatest warrior ever born. He was perceived as fast and agile with a natural talent for combat. The Iliad describes him as having podas kis, which means he was swift-footed. As far as I know, Achilles had no disdain for Agamemnon's rule before the war. The feud between them began after the Trojan War had already started, but we'll get to that later.
Men are haunted by the vastness of eternity. And so we ask ourselves, will our actions echo across the centuries? Will strangers hear our names long after we're gone and wonder who we were, how bravely we fought, how fiercely we loved?
Odysseus' monologue laments the impermanence of existence. He wonders if he and his loved ones will be remembered in the distant future. This is actually one of the core motifs of the Iliad. There is no English word for it, but in ancient Greek it is called hysterophymia. Hysterophymia is a compound word from hystera, which means after, and phymi, which means speaking. And the closest modern equivalent would be the concept of posthumous fame. It means to be spoken of after your death. Hysterophymia was an immensely important ideal in almost all ancient Greek cultures. It was the notion that if a man performed great deeds, he would be remembered for many future generations, and that was perceived as the highest of honors. To be forgotten after death meant your life was insignificant and inconsequential. It meant you didn't manage to do anything of worth in your entire life.
That's why no one will remember your name.
I'll remember the name. This war will never be forgotten, nor will the heroes who fight in it.
You came here because you want your name to last through the ages.
If you stay in Larissa, you will find peace. You'll have sons and daughters, and they will have children. When you're gone, they will remember you. But when your children are dead, and their children after them, your name will be lost.
This was not limited to acts of bravery and heroism. Any man could achieve hysterophymia by making a contribution to humanity. It could be in the field of art or philosophy or mathematics. Any form of excellence was valued, but of course the highest contribution was to sacrifice one's life for the many. This act of remembering men of great deeds served as an incentive for young boys to aspire to greatness, so that they too could be remembered. So many ancient Greek myths, if not all of them, served as either cautionary tales or standards for the next generation to live up to.
You can't have the whole world, Agamemnon. It's too big, even for you.
I don't want to watch another massacre. Let's settle this war in the old manner. Your best fighter against my best.
This is quite accurate. In many instances, it is mentioned that disputes would often be resolved by duel, but it was usually the people themselves fighting, not champions in their stead.
Are the stories about you true? They say your mother is an immortal goddess. They say you can't be killed.
I wouldn't be bothering with the shield then, would I?
Contrary to popular belief, the notion that Achilles was immortal because he was dipped in the river Styx by his mother is not part of the original Greek myth. The earliest mention of it comes from the Roman poet Publius Papinius Statius, who wrote the Achilleid in the 1st century CE, so basically around half a millennium after the earliest surviving fragment of the Iliad. Homer didn't mention or imply at any point that Achilles was immortal. On the contrary, Achilles was portrayed as mortal, and his death was constantly being foreshadowed as inevitable. During the events of the Iliad, Achilles is at one point wounded by Asteropeus, who managed to momentarily outwit him on account of being ambidextrous, grazing Achilles' forearm with a spear before eventually being defeated. The text explicitly mentions Achilles bleeding from his arm, which means he wasn't impervious to damage. By the way, Achilles' armor, especially his helmet, is a bit anachronistic. This design is called the Corinthian style, and it shows up a few hundred years later. We have very little surviving evidence of Mycenaean armor, but it would probably look more like what everyone else is wearing. In the Iliad, Odysseus is explicitly described as wearing a boar's tusk helmet.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?
What Achilles says here doesn't make a lot of sense in the historical context. At the time, kings were indeed expected to fight in the front lines. Agamemnon was king of the Mycenaeans, and Achilles was king of the Myrmidons, representing his father who was too old to fight. Both were experienced warlords. In the Iliad, Agamemnon is depicted as highly skilled in combat, single-handedly killing hundreds of Trojan soldiers. My personal assumption is that because this movie came out in 2004, shortly after the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq had started, this line is meant as political commentary. Throughout the movie, Achilles is portrayed as a lowly soldier who gets things done, while Agamemnon is portrayed as the cowardly general who leads from the rear, reaping all the glory at the expense of his soldiers. This is inaccurate compared to the myth and anachronistic compared to the culture of the time, because no army would accept to follow a king who refuses to lead from the front. That being said, it is a perfectly valid retelling of the story. The way this duel is depicted is remarkably faithful to the Iliad. The way duels happened was the two warriors would approach each other on the battlefield, usually by chariot, dismount, exchange a few insults or boasts, and then they would throw their spears at each other. Normally, each warrior had two spears, a sword, and a shield. The warriors would take turns at throwing one spear at each other, and then engage in close combat with their second spear and shield. Sometimes they would throw the second spear as well, and then fight with sword and shield. The image of a thrown spear flying through the air and crashing violently into the opponent's shield is iconic and mentioned repeatedly throughout the Iliad, so this scene is a particularly nice touch, even though this entire chapter is a fictional addition to the myth. Achilles shoving his spear into the earth instead of using it is also fictional, but it is in line with his arrogant personality. He's like, I don't even need my spear to kill you. That's something he would totally do. Another accurate detail is that Achilles indeed famously carried only one spear, and he was supposedly the only one capable of wielding it due to its unique design and weight. The way Brad Pitt runs and moves is also consistent with Achilles' epithet of being swift-footed, killing Boagrius by maneuvering quickly around his guard instead of using brute strength. By the way, as far as I know, Boagrius is not a character from Greek mythology. The name does appear in the Iliad, but it's a river, not a person. Sparta doesn't have a port. It's not a coastal city.
Wives are for breeding. You understand? For making little princes. Come enjoy yourself.
This is completely incorrect, and it's one of the few details I genuinely dislike, because the exact opposite was true. Wives were not for breeding. Wives were highly respected and valued. If a high-status man wanted more children, he would have a concubine, called a palakis, and use her for the purpose of breeding, never his wife. To treat your wife merely as a baby factory was viewed as extremely dishonorable. Yes, adultery did happen. Even though most ancient Greek cultures were patriarchal, there were many instances of women being defiant and circumventing the social rules to get what they wanted. This was not always viewed as a negative thing. Female mythological figures who were clever and resourceful were often celebrated. Also, most available sources seem to imply that the gender stereotype for women at the time was that they were more lustful than men. Today, the Western stereotype is that men always think about sex, but in ancient Greece, the stereotype was completely inverted. The same is true for violence. Women were perceived as more prone to violence than men. Spousal physical abuse, for example, was commonly regarded as an issue where the wives were violent to their husbands, not the other way around. The theme of abduction is very common in Greek mythology. Many myths revolve around men abducting women. It should be noted, however, that this doesn't necessarily mean rape. Because women were viewed as having less self-determination than men, if a man and a woman ran away together, it was perceived as the man abducting the woman, because the man had not asked for permission from the woman's father for her hand in marriage. So whenever a couple eloped, it was described as an abduction, because only the man could be held accountable for the actions of the couple. Even if the woman protested and claimed to love the man, her consent was often dismissed and viewed as evidence that she had been seduced and brainwashed by the man, who took advantage of the woman's natural lustfulness. In the Iliad, Helen is portrayed as being influenced by the goddess Aphrodite into falling in love with Paris, which can easily be interpreted as symbolism for the act of seduction, making Helen's consent about the abduction ambiguous. However, during the events of the Iliad, Helen has already become quite resentful towards Paris. She repeatedly insults him, as well as the goddess Aphrodite herself, for having manipulated her into leaving her own home and basically causing the war.
A beautiful morning. Poseidon has blessed our voyage. Sometimes the gods bless you in the morning and curse you in the afternoon.
What Hector says here perfectly encapsulates the general perception of the Olympian gods. The gods of ancient Greece were nothing like the Christian God, who serves as the embodiment of perfection. The Greek gods were extremely imperfect. While they generally represented noble principles, they were often fickle and petty, exhibiting many human-like weaknesses and insecurities.
Oh, and that sounds heroic to you, doesn't it? To die fighting. Tell me, little brother, have you ever killed a man?
No.
Ever seen a man die in combat?
No.
I've killed men. And I've heard them dying, and I've watched them dying, and there's nothing glorious about it. Nothing poetic. You say you want to die for love, but you know nothing about dying, and you know nothing about love.
Contrary to popular belief, One of the core themes of the Iliad is that war is not glorious. Bravery and courage in battle may be glorious, but war itself is not. It is a nasty and horrible thing. The Iliad spends a lot of time describing the grim realities of war, the mutilated bodies of the fallen, the senseless loss of life, the pain and suffering of loved ones, the traumatic experiences of the soldiers. It goes out of its way to destroy any notion of war as romantic. In the Iliad, war is an inevitable part of human existence, driven by the cruelty of the fates. At the same time, in Greek mythology, love was measured not by passion, but by devotion. Loving someone intensely, like Paris loves Helen, would not be viewed as noble. It is the reckless love of irresponsible youthfulness. True love, by ancient Greek standards, is the long-lasting, devoted love that stands strong against the test of both temptation and time. For example, the love between Odysseus and Penelope is the kind of love an ancient Greek audience would root for. So Hector's line,
You say you want to die for love, but you know nothing about dying, and you know nothing about love.
perfectly illustrates some of the most important motifs of both the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Peace is for the women and the weak.
The line "peace is for the women and the weak" doesn't exactly vibe well with me. It's not impossible for someone of that time to have said, but it seems a bit off. During those times, war was an ever-present threat. People were not romanticizing war because most of them had experienced it in one way or another. Peace was not something contemptible. On the contrary, it was something everyone desired. To say that peace is for women would be very silly. Also, people in ancient Greece generally didn't talk like that because perceptions of gender identity were very different. This sounds like a very modern insult. To say something like, "I shouldn't do this because that's something a woman would do," would be a very unusual way of thinking for someone in ancient Greece. Throughout the years, a lot of people have claimed that Achilles and Patroclus were lovers. When I was taught the Iliad at school, my own professor made this argument. Personally, I find the theory to be rather reductive and a little sexist. It's basically arguing that just because two men share a close bond and one later mourns the death of the other very intensely, it must mean they were lovers, as if men are incapable of having any close bond other than sexual. I think viewing Achilles and Patroclus as lovers actually lessens the quality and nuance of their relationship. According to the original myth, they were cousins. Also, Patroclus was older than Achilles. He was not his student.
Your reputation for hospitality is fast becoming legend.
In ancient Greece, the principle of hospitality, known as xenia, was a profoundly important institution. Any Greek person was honor-bound to be hospitable to any guests in their home. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey frequently allude to this concept.
They insulted Greece.
They insulted one Greek, a man who couldn't hold on to his wife. What business is that of mine?
Your business is war, my friend.
According to the myth, the reason the abduction of Helen was perceived as an insult to all the Greek kingdoms was because of the oath of Tyndareus. Because Helen was considered to be the most beautiful woman on earth, when she became of age, she had potential suitors from every kingdom of Greece. In order to prevent war, Odysseus proposed that all the suitors should agree to take an oath that no matter who was chosen to be the husband of Helen, all the other suitors would accept the decision and defend their marriage if anyone threatened it. And that's what they did. So when Paris supposedly abducted Helen, all the kings of Greece were still bound by that oath.
But if you go to Troy, you'll never come home. For your glory walks hand in hand with your doom.
This scene is very faithful to the myth. Indeed, Achilles' mother Thetis foretells that Achilles will never return from the war. This prophecy is a central theme in the Iliad. Achilles is burdened by the knowledge that if he pursues glory, he will not survive. His elderly father will be left without an heir to his kingdom. The tragedy of Achilles is that he knowingly chooses glory over life. Achilles was not the first person to reach Troy. It was actually a man called Protesilaus. You see, there was a prophecy claiming that the first man to step foot on Trojan soil would not live to see the end of the war. Now, there are several variations to this myth. In most versions, Protesilaus knowingly and bravely leads the charge and is killed. In the version I learned as a child, Odysseus tricks him by throwing his shield on the ground and landing on his shield, so Protesilaus, who was the second man to disembark, is the one affected by the prophecy, because Odysseus' feet technically didn't touch Trojan soil. This tactic is called the phalanx, and even though the earliest historical evidence of it greatly predates the Greek civilization, and we know for a fact that it was extensively used in Greece during the Classical Age, there is no conclusive evidence on how developed the phalanx would have been during the Bronze Age. So this scene is not inaccurate, but we don't know how accurate it is either. Generally, the idea of using a shield wall is not exactly rocket science, so it would be foolish to assume ancient people were too stupid to think of it. This guy is from the Iliad. His name is Ajax the Telamonian, and he is indeed described in the Iliad as a colossal giant of a man, and the strongest of all the Achaeans.
Greeks are dying!
This is another detail I dislike. The Greeks did not refer to themselves as Greeks back then, but I don't mind that. The Greek side was often referred to as the Achaeans, and it was an alliance of multiple individual kingdoms. My issue is that the war was not perceived by either side as Greece versus Troy, because that wouldn't make any sense to them. Both the Trojans and the Achaeans spoke the same language and worshipped the same gods, so the Achaeans would not view the Trojans as foreigners. To a Greek person of the time, a Trojan would be as much of a foreigner as any other person from another Greek kingdom. So the line "Greeks are dying" sounds very off to me. That's not something anyone from that time would say. It would be much better if he simply said, "Our allies are dying, our men are dying," something like that. As far as I know, he's never depicted wielding a giant warhammer, but that's fine. However, the Iliad does mention him holding a huge tower shield. I really like this depiction of Achilles' fighting style. In the Iliad, Achilles is described as this unstoppable force of death and destruction, cleaving through the army of Troy like it was nothing, painting entire rivers red with their blood. This choreography perfectly encapsulates that. As far as I know, this scene is fictional. While Achilles was indeed very often defiant and blasphemous towards the gods, he never desecrated the statue of Apollo. But it's something he could plausibly do, so I have no problem with it. It also serves as foreshadowing him being killed by an arrow later, because Apollo is an archer.
You speak of war as if it's a game. But how many wives wait at Troy's gates for husbands they'll never see again?
Perhaps your brother can comfort them. I hear he's good at charming other men's wives.
I love this exchange so much. It's entirely fictional, but insults and sharp wit were ever present throughout the Iliad. Generally, in the ancient Greek world, a clever insult was often perceived to be far more devastating than victory in combat. If you could insult your enemy with a witty comeback, you were considered a fucking legend.
If you sailed any slower, the war would be over.
I don't mind missing the start, as long as I'm here at the end. My lord.
This is an amusing meta-joke, poking fun at the fact that it took Odysseus 10 years to return back home to Ithaca after the war, and at the same time, Odysseus' reply is a nice bit of foreshadowing because Achilles doesn't make it to the end of the war, while Odysseus does. Foreshadowing, by the way, is a fundamental trope of the Iliad and ancient Greek storytelling in general. Everything is constantly being foreshadowed. Achilles' death is foreshadowed, Hector's death is foreshadowed, the fall of Troy is foreshadowed. Almost every outcome is regarded as known and inevitable. Yet the characters still do whatever they can to either prevent what they fear is going to happen or make sure it happens exactly as the fates want it to happen. This dramatic irony is the most foundational aspect of Greek mythology, as it highlights both the futility and defiance of human existence. This is very accurate. The lesser kings would often pay tribute to stronger kings via gifts and overt flattery. Both in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the principle of diplomacy, presvia, serves as a central topic as it morphs the quality of relations between kingdoms through proper communication and respect. Both the disputes between Paris and Menelaus, as well as Agamemnon and Achilles, are basically failures in diplomacy. They are cautionary tales on the importance of preserving good faith relationships for the benefit of peace.
War is young men dying and old men talking. You know this. Ignore the politics.
Once again, this is an anachronistic comment. Back then, war was not young men dying and old men talking. Old rulers very often led armies into battle. For example, King Leonidas was 60 years old during the Battle of Thermopylae. Being old meant you were more experienced in battle because you had seen more war. This is probably another instance of political commentary aimed at the American government.
But that victory is not yours. Kings did not kneel to Achilles. Kings did not pay homage to Achilles.
Perhaps the kings were too far behind to see. The soldiers won the battle.
History remembers kings, not soldiers.
Again, the movie exaggerates the hierarchical gap between Agamemnon and Achilles. Yes, Agamemnon was the High King of the Mycenaean Empire. He is the supreme leader. However, Achilles is not just a grunt. He is the acting king of the Myrmidons, serving in place of his father, who was too old and sickly to participate in the expedition. But it's true that Achilles is technically subservient to Agamemnon. Agamemnon and Achilles are bound by the principle of Philotis. Achilles has to respect and defer to Agamemnon's rule, while Agamemnon has to respect his subjects and treat them fairly. This is also a direct scene from the Iliad. In one of his arguments with Agamemnon, Achilles draws his sword, which was an extremely dishonorable act, but the goddess Athena convinces him to stay his blade.
I'll have her give me a bath. And then, who knows?
You sack of wine!
This is a valid translation from a direct quote. In the Iliad, Achilles calls Agamemnon Inovares, which means wine-heavy. It's an amusing detail to include. Briseis is an important character to the story of the Iliad, but in a somewhat objectified way. You know that feminist adage that in the game of the patriarchy, women are not the opposing team, women are the ball? That's who Briseis is. So let's back up a little. In the myth, Briseis is not a priestess, and she's not royalty. She's not even Trojan. She is from Lyrnissos, a small city-state that was allied with Troy. The Achaeans attack it and pillage it. Achilles kills Briseis' family and enslaves her. Agamemnon takes another young woman, Chryseis, as his own slave. Chryseis' father, who was a priest of Apollo, approached the Achaeans and offered ransom of gold and silver in exchange for his daughter. Agamemnon not only refused, but also taunted the priest and mocked him about how much he would enjoy raping his daughter. Chryseis' father went away and prayed to Apollo to curse the Achaeans. Apollo listened and sent plague among the Achaean camp. Agamemnon, realizing his mistake, promptly returned Chryseis back to her father, but since he felt humiliated having to give up his prize, Agamemnon decides to take Briseis from Achilles as compensation for his loss. Achilles views this as a violation of the principle of Philotis and becomes enraged. That is the reason of the rift between Agamemnon and Achilles, and this is actually where the narrative of the Iliad begins. The Iliad is about the wrath of Achilles. That's how the poem starts. The Iliad begins with an invocation to the muse Calliope to sing about the wrath of Achilles. The syntax of the first line is significant. Literally, the first word of the first line of the first verse of the poem is wrath. The story itself begins with that word. That's the story of the Iliad. Now some of you may be thinking, wait, are they really fighting over who gets to rape a young girl they abducted? And the answer is yes, that is exactly what they're fighting about. It may feel alienating to modern viewers, but that was normal at the time. Women and children were generally spared during warfare, taken as slaves instead of being killed. It was considered more humane to enslave a woman and keep her as a concubine than to kill her. That being said, Briseis herself as a person is not that important. What's important is that the actions of Agamemnon have dishonored Achilles. In ancient Greece, this was referred to as timi, which translates to worth. A man's honor was visible and measurable. It was literally his worth as a person. This could be represented by his share of spoils after a battle, his clothes, his armor, his weapons. This was called hieras. So Agamemnon, taking Briseis from Achilles, deprives him of hieras, the visible signs of honor. This humiliates Achilles, and the shame he feels is expressed through his wrath. That is the very essence of the Iliad. If someone asks you what the Iliad is about, this is the answer. The Iliad is not about the Trojan War. It's about Achilles and his wrath as a reaction to shame.
I saw them burning on the pyres. That's my fault. It is. You know it is.
This scene, while fictional, does encapsulate a large part of Helen's characterization in the Iliad. Helen repeatedly expresses immense regret for following Paris to Troy. She curses herself, wishing she had died instead of falling in love with Paris. She openly blames herself for the war. She even refers to herself as Kinopis, which literally translates to dog-eyed, having the eyes of a dog, which, as it is with many ancient Greek words, can mean a number of different things, like being shameless, irresponsible, or impulsive. Basically, it means to look at the world the way a dog would. Even today, we use this metaphor in English. We say he's a dog to refer to someone who is very lustful.
But the men are ready. We stay till Agamemnon groans to have Achilles back.
Modern readers may view Achilles' refusal to fight as petulant and childish, and in some ways it is, but there is another layer to this decision that a lot of people tend to miss. Achilles is obsessed with glory. He wants it more than any other man who has ever lived, and in spite of that, he decides to abstain from the battle. He is willing to sacrifice the one thing he craves the most because he has been dishonored by Agamemnon. He argues that glory is hollow if you are fighting for a dishonorable leader. The movie does kinda allude to this when Achilles tells Patroclus not to waste his life following some fool's orders, but I don't think it makes the underlying tension clear enough. Again, the reason for this was probably to make a political statement about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is one of the biggest deviations from the myth. In the myth, Paris and Menelaus do engage in duel, and when Paris is about to lose, Aphrodite teleports him away from the battlefield. The Achaeans view this as violating the rules of the duel, so the war continues. Menelaus doesn't die during the war. Since the movie has removed all divine interventions and establishes Paris as an inexperienced fighter, it seems reasonable to me to have the duel end with Menelaus being killed by Hector. It also serves as a great opportunity to showcase an important trope, fleeing from combat.
Is this what you left me for?
Modern viewers are often disgusted with Paris' behavior in this scene. They perceive him as a pathetic coward. Interestingly, this is not the case in the Iliad, and it's one of several instances in which ancient Greek culture was actually more progressive than modern Western culture. Today, even people who claim to be leftists, liberals, or progressives often view the notion of men avoiding to fight as cowardly, unmanly, and generally worthy of contempt. In the Iliad, fleeing from combat is not shameful because war is terrifying. Not wanting to fight does not deprive men of their gender. Fear is viewed as a natural reaction to the horrors of war. Overcoming your fear and showing bravery is indeed hugely honorable, but succumbing to fear does not dishonor you. It simply makes you normal. You see, the characters of the epic poems are not viewed as everyday mundane people. They are heroes, revered by the common populace as astoundingly exceptional individuals, and even heroes are afraid of war. That's how terrible war is. This is not a minor detail, but a core element of the Iliad. So when characters in the Iliad flee from battle or avoid going to war, it is not portrayed as something unmanly. Ancient Greek cultures held many views that are considered sexist today, but in this case, we today are far more sexist than the ancient Greeks. I am by no means an expert in ancient warfare, but as far as I know, this type of disorganized charge is not accurate. Granted, the Achaeans are supposedly enraged by the Trojans' dishonor, so they charge without formation, so you could maybe justify it this way. Herodotus does mention of a charge during the Battle of Marathon, where the Greeks advanced swiftly to cover ground while they were in range of the Persians' archers so that they could engage the enemy as quickly as possible, but it is theorized that they did this in formation, not disorganized. Greek sources also mention a technique called othismos, which literally translates to pushing, but historians are in disagreement as to what exactly that entailed. Some argue that the phalanx would use a shield wall to charge and push the enemy with their shields, breaking the enemy formation and attacking the revealed weak points, while others argue that it is a metaphorical push, meaning that the army's advancement would displace the enemy and force them to retreat, pushing them back. This is another deviation from the myth. Ajax doesn't die during the Iliad. He dies after Achilles' death. Basically, once Achilles was dead, there was dispute among the Achaeans over who would inherit his armor. Ajax argued that he should be the one to keep the armor because he was the strongest among all the Greeks, but eventually Odysseus was voted to keep Achilles' armor, which Ajax thought was unfair, and in the earlier versions of the myth, he lost his mind because of his anger and slaughtered a flock of sheep in a fit of rage, after which he was overwhelmed with shame and committed suicide. It's a very tragic end to a great and honorable warrior. And as you can probably tell, a lot of these myths revolve around the inherent dangers of losing one's self to their emotions. In modern Western culture, the stereotype for masculinity is to generally be perceived as stoic or even unfeeling. But in the ancient Greek world, the exact opposite was true. Men were viewed as passionate beings, driven almost entirely by emotion. And one of the greatest challenges of the male existence was to be able to rise above that and embrace rational thought. But anyway, getting back to the topic of Hector versus Ajax. In the Iliad, they do actually duel, but it's a stalemate. They fight for hours until night falls, so they stop the battle and each side retires back to their camps. They agree to a truce so that each side could collect their dead from the battlefield.
Have our men gather our fallen. Send an emissary to the Greeks. Tell them they can collect their dead.
But they have done the same for us?
So this is actually a very complex topic in the Greek epics. Generally, it was believed that all dead deserve a proper burial, and fallen warriors should be respected. However, a lot of things that are considered taboo today were actually allowed back then. For example, looting dead soldiers was permissible. If you killed someone, you were allowed to take their armor, their shield, or their weapon. Erecting dead bodies or hanging them from trees as a sign of intimidation was acceptable. Mutilation of dead bodies, like cutting someone's head off, was also acceptable. When a high-ranking enemy warrior was killed, it was customary for other lower-status warriors to take turns stabbing at the dead body as a form of mockery. That being said, the line, "would they have done the same for us?" is a bit strange, because yes, they would have. And they did. Both sides allowed the other to collect their dead. But it's okay, a character is allowed to be biased against his own enemies. And also it serves as foreshadowing for Hector's death later.
Your private battle with Achilles is destroying us.
Achilles is one man.
Hector is one man. Look what he did to us today.
Hector fights for his country. Achilles fights only for himself.
I don't care about the man's allegiance. I care about his ability to win battles.
He's right. The men's morale is weak.
Well, even if I could make peace with Achilles, the man won't listen to me.
I'll talk to him.
He'll want the girl back.
You can have that damn girl. I haven't touched her.
This is an important chapter in the Iliad. It is called the Embassy, or Presvia, and it goes rather differently from the movie. So because of Achilles' abstinence from the war, the Achaeans are actually losing. The major Achaean warriors have a meeting, pleading with Agamemnon to end his feud with Achilles. Agamemnon relents and admits he was wrong. He decides to make peace with Achilles and reimburse him for his lost honor. So Odysseus, Ajax, who is still alive at the time, and Phoenix meet with Achilles, and they all try to convince him to rejoin the war effort. Agamemnon's offer is overwhelmingly generous. He offers Briseis back to Achilles, completely untouched, as well as 7 cities in the Greek mainland to rule, many items of gold, silver, and iron, 12 of his best horses, 7 beautiful enslaved women from Lesbos. The list goes on, including one of Agamemnon's own daughter's hand in marriage. Odysseus makes a pragmatic argument about the size of the compensation. Phoenix urges Achilles not to let anger consume him. Ajax appeals to the principles of honor and friendship, arguing that they should all be fighting for glory together. What happens next is the reason I wish this scene was included in the movie, because it's the second most poignant moment in Achilles' character development. To the surprise of everyone, Achilles rejects the offer. That's right, Achilles doesn't actually take Briseis back, like he does in the movie. He says he would not be interested in accepting the apology even if the ransom was 20 times larger. He expresses disillusionment in the glory of war. He says a hero and a coward both eventually end up dead anyway, and you can't take your wealth with you to the afterlife. So what is the point of accepting a gift that he won't even get to enjoy, since the glorious life of a warrior is a short one? Achilles concludes that a long life without glory may actually be a better alternative, so he announces that he has decided to sail home. Granted, the movie does include some aspects of this transformational moment.
We sail in the morning.
Greeks are being slaughtered. We can't just sail away.
If it's fighting you still long for, there'll always be another war, that I promise you.
These are our countrymen. I ate, laughed, mourned with these men while you hid in your tent. You betray all of Greece just to see Agamemnon fall.
But without the proper context, a lot of the nuance is lost.
Someone has to lose.
The gods envy us. They envy us because we're mortal. Because any moment might be our last. Everything's more beautiful because we're doomed. You will never be lovelier than you are now. We will never be here again.
While the sentiment expressed is indeed derived from ancient Greek philosophy, it is very anachronistic in this instance. What Achilles says here is basically alluding to the philosophy of Heraclitus. Heraclitus was a philosopher who lived around 500 BCE, which would be at least 200 years after the Iliad is estimated to have been written, and 700 years after the supposed events of the Trojan War, hence the anachronism. A core aspect of his philosophy was that the universe is in constant flux, encapsulated by the aphorism Pandari uden meni, which means everything flows, nothing stands still. Another legendary quote is that it is impossible to cross the same river twice. In the Iliad, Patroclus doesn't put on Achilles' armor in secret. He does so with Achilles' permission. The Achaeans were losing the war, and the Trojan army was dangerously close to reaching their ships. If the Trojans managed to set their ships on fire, the Achaeans would never be able to return home, which would be a crushing blow to their already fading morale. So Patroclus had the idea to pretend that Achilles was joining the battle again in order to intimidate the Trojans and potentially shift the tide. Achilles agreed, but only if Patroclus did this to drive the Trojans away from the ships and then return back. As soon as the Trojan army sees Patroclus charge into the battlefield dressed as Achilles, they become terrified and immediately flee the battlefield. That includes Hector. So Patroclus' plan worked perfectly. However, seeing the Trojans flee from him makes him drunk with power, so he continues chasing after them, especially Hector. To punish him for his arrogance, Apollo smites Patroclus with a magical blow that completely disarms him, including his armor, revealing his identity. However, Hector is still paralyzed with fear, so he does nothing until another Trojan warrior named Ephorvos strikes Patroclus from behind, wounding him. And only then Hector finally approaches and finishes him off. Hector also takes the armor from Patroclus, which is an important detail because later, when Achilles wants to avenge Patroclus, he is left without armor, so he has to get a new set of armor forged for him. The Iliad spends a considerable amount of time just to describe Achilles' new armor and shield, because it symbolizes Achilles' transformation into a new person. So this part is a very important moment in the Iliad, but the movie portrays it completely differently. And I don't blame it, because modern audiences would probably not respond very well to how the story was originally written. First, let's do a short recap. Since the beginning of the Iliad, Achilles has been abstaining from the war.
Hector!
We have seen other characters perform great feats of heroism, but not Achilles.
Hector!
Now, we are almost at the end of the Iliad, 2 chapters from the end, and Achilles is burning with inhuman rage over the death of Patroclus, as he finally enters the battle.
Hector!
His previous philosophical thoughts about a long, quiet life and his disillusionment about glory have evaporated, only to be replaced by an insatiable desire for vengeance. Achilles fights with such unbelievable ferocity that eclipses any other character's deeds. He is unstoppable. He kills half the army of the Trojans by himself. There are literally piles of dead bodies left in his wake. Even the gods are shocked by his brutality. The entirety of the Trojan forces flee from Achilles. All the soldiers run into the city to avoid the wrath of Achilles. All except one. Hector decides to stay behind and confront Achilles. Priam calls to Hector from the top of the walls, begging him to get inside. He says Achilles is a wild beast that the gods are favoring, so Hector has no hope of winning this duel. Priam is actually making a pragmatic argument. He basically says to Hector that he is more valuable to Troy alive than dead. He argues that while Hector can have an honorable and glorious death in his duel with Achilles, Troy itself will soon fall without its greatest warrior there to defend it, and Priam ends his monologue by juxtaposing Hector's glorious death with a very shocking description of his own upcoming death. Dogs eating the genitals off of his decaying corpse. Once again, we see the story of the Iliad directly challenging the notion of the glorious warrior mentality. That is the essence of the Iliad, and it's something a lot of people don't actually realize. The Iliad is not about how cool Achilles and Hector and the rest of the heroes were. It's about how utterly pointless glory is, and how destructive it is, not only for the men who pursue it, but for everyone around them. And this is not a small matter. The Iliad serves as a deconstruction of the romanticization of war, with its story revealing the corruptive endlessness of violence. So the Iliad has shown both Achilles and Priam openly express doubt over the validity of pursuing glory. This is an interesting bit of foreshadowing that will pay off later. While Hector remains unmoved by his father's words, he is not without doubt. On the contrary, he is overflowing with anxiety as he sees Achilles approaching in the distance, so Hector weighs his options. He thinks to himself that his father is right. He should have retreated through the gates with the others, but now it's too late. He can't go back on his word now. That would be shameful, and everyone would lose faith in him for his arrogance. He has to fight Achilles and either kill him or be killed by him. He thinks, what if I put down my arms and try to negotiate? Since Helen is the reason for this war, maybe I can offer to give Helen back. But then he decides that this is pointless, because Achilles is not a man to be reasoned with. This would not be resolved through idle chit-chat, and meeting Achilles without his weapons would be foolish, as Achilles would just cut him down as if he were a naked woman. But as he sees Achilles getting closer, with his new armor gleaming under the sun as if it were on fire, Hector loses his will and flees. Hector runs in panic along the city walls, and Achilles chases him with great speed, like a falcon diving for its prey. They both run around the city walls for 3 laps. That's right, they run around the entire city of Troy 3 times, like it's fucking Benny Hill. Eventually, the goddess Athena intervenes. She takes the form of Deiphobos, one of Hector's brothers, and tricks him into standing his ground. Hector finally confronts Achilles, and he does actually say what he says in the movie.
I'll make a pact with you. With the gods as our witnesses. Let us pledge that the winner will allow the loser all the proper funeral rituals.
There are no pacts between lions and men.
Achilles' response is also an almost direct quote. In the Iliad, it's much more verbose, but he basically says the same thing. I will not be doing an analysis of the choreography, as there are people far more knowledgeable in ancient warfare and HEMA who have done this already. But I will say I really like this fight sequence from a storytelling perspective. First, Achilles removes his helmet to show his identity, but having no helmet is a huge disadvantage. Hector removes his own helmet as well, refusing to accept this advantage, even though Achilles is clearly the superior fighter. This type of thing doesn't happen in the Iliad because duels are rarely fair in the modern sense, but it shows Hector's commitment to honor, which is a nice touch. Achilles shows off his footwork, using feints and dancing around Hector, which is in keeping with his portrayal in the Iliad, where he is repeatedly described as swift-footed. Achilles smashes his spear into Hector's shield, and Hector struggles to regain balance, establishing the fact that Achilles is far stronger than Hector. They both parry each other's strikes, indicating that even though Hector is outclassed, he can still hold his own. Achilles destroys Hector's spear, which from a physics perspective is almost impossible to do, but it can be interpreted as a sign of just how strong Achilles is. It also shows how Achilles has begun chipping away at Hector's defenses, slowly breaking him down. Hector is doomed. Again, Hector loses his frame and is shoved backwards, while Achilles maintains perfect balance. Hector discards his broken spear and uses his shield with both hands. This is a valid technique. The shield is a weapon in itself, but it also symbolizes the nature of the two warriors. Achilles is the aggressor, Hector is the defender. Hector traps Achilles' spear with his shield and breaks it. This is actually far more plausible, but still extremely difficult. At the same time, they both draw their swords and the fight enters its next stage. Hector is visibly tired, but Achilles seems completely unbothered. His mouth is closed, he's not even breathing hard. At this point, it seems as if Achilles is toying with Hector. He dodges Hector's strikes with great ease and then slams his shield once more. Hector, however, despite his increasing exhaustion, manages to connect with a strike. He grazes Achilles' armor. Achilles is surprised. Nobody has ever managed to strike him before. He realizes that Hector is actually a worthy opponent. The two get entangled. Achilles pushes Hector off and he falls, losing his shield. Again, we see Hector's defenses being chipped away. Achilles drops his own shield and refuses to engage Hector before he stands up. Hector picks up the front piece of Achilles' broken spear and uses it as a secondary weapon, which I really like, and I will explain why in a moment. Even with two weapons, Hector fails to overwhelm Achilles. He parries and dodges his strikes without issue. Hector is beyond exhausted. He is barely able to stand. Achilles also seems tired for the first time. Hector might not be as strong or as fast as Achilles, but he is a great warrior. Hector musters the strength to make one last desperate attack. He charges at Achilles with both weapons, putting him on the retreat. Achilles gives ground for the first time in his life. He has never done that before. Even so, he still manages to push Hector off. Hector is done. He is stumbling like a zombie. There is no more fight left in him. In the very next attack, Achilles grabs the spearhead from Hector's hand and strikes him with it. It's over. And this is why I like the detail of Hector picking up Achilles' broken spear. As I mentioned earlier, Achilles' spear in the Iliad is unique. Only Achilles is able to wield it, but this works both literally and symbolically. Homeric heroes often have their own weapons. For example, Odysseus has the recurve bow that only he could string. It's kind of like Thor's hammer from comic books. It's not just about the skill or strength to use a weapon, but the fact that the hero is worthy enough to wield it. Hector managed to hold a piece of Achilles' spear for a while and used it quite skillfully, but eventually it had to return to its rightful owner. And as soon as Achilles holds it in his hands again, he immediately kills Hector with it. In the Iliad, Achilles does indeed tie Hector's body to his chariot and drags it around. He doesn't merely drag it back to his camp, he even parades it around the walls of Troy. In the Iliad, it is mentioned that Achilles' grief over the loss of Patroclus is still affecting him, regardless of how much he desecrates Hector's body. He is inconsolable and restless. He doesn't know what to do to alleviate his pain. This is the most iconic and climactic scene of the Iliad, and the movie often quotes it word for word. The phrase,
"I have endured what no one on earth has endured before. I kiss the hands of the man who killed my son,"
is one of the most powerful lines in the Iliad. However, one major difference is that the movie resolves the issue too easily. Achilles cries, gives Hector back to Priam, and bids him farewell. In the Iliad, this scene is far more intense and emotionally charged, and also far more realistic. First of all, Achilles doesn't leave the tent. Both him and Priam cry for a very long time. Priam cries for the loss of his son and for Troy, while Achilles cries for his actions, for himself, for Patroclus, and for his own father, whom he knows he will never see again. However, Achilles is not magically cured of his trauma. He is still grieving. He is still emotionally unstable, but now he has the self-awareness to acknowledge it. So as Priam is continuing to beg to have Hector's body back, Achilles responds defensively. He says, "Do not provoke me in my grief. I am already planning to give Hector back to you and ensure safe passage back to Troy, but I am barely holding it together. And even though it would be a violation to Zeus to kill a visitor under my roof, I might actually do it if you press me further. This line may sound jarring to modern readers, but it illustrates both the extent of Achilles' emotional instability and, paradoxically, his self-restraint. Achilles is smoldering with inhuman rage, yet Priam managed to stir inside him the capacity to feel enough empathy to briefly become human again. But this is not a permanent change, it's merely the first step. Achilles is still the same flawed man he used to be, still capable of cruelty and brutality, but he is trying to change. He is showing the capacity to take accountability for his actions, because he describes his emotions as his own. He doesn't say anger may overcome me, as if it were an external force. He knows his emotions are his responsibility. The text of the Iliad shows remarkable understanding of the psychology of trauma. Achilles reacts to his own momentary vulnerability with a defense mechanism, immediately feeling the temptation to relapse back to his old patterns. And that's what makes Achilles' mercy so significant. We know what a monster Achilles can be, so for him to show this much restraint is almost shocking. In the Iliad, Achilles arranges for Hector's body to be bathed and anointed with oils. He then invites Priam to dinner, and they have a feast. Afterwards, Achilles arranges for a luxurious bed to be made for Priam, so he could spend the night. Once again, the importance of hospitality, even among enemies, is made clear. And then, Achilles finally sleeps. His restlessness is gone. The Iliad ends with Priam returning back to Troy and having a funeral for Hector. 3 women speak in his honor: his wife, Andromache, his mother, Hecate, and Helen. Andromache laments the fact that Hector's death foreshadows the fall of Troy. Hecate mourns the loss of her favorite son. Helen mentions how Hector was the only Trojan who didn't seem to hate her. And that's where the Iliad ends. The rest of the story is told in separate epic poems, which have unfortunately not survived. According to the myth, Achilles dies before the fall of Troy, but is indeed killed by Paris. A lot of people may not realize that this scene is remarkably faithful to the original myth. In the earliest existing sources, Achilles is shot in the ankle, not the heel, and then in the chest. The story of him being dipped in the river Styx as a baby with his mother holding him by the heels was a later addition to the myth. Like I said earlier, Achilles was not immortal in the earlier versions of the myth, and he is certainly not immortal in the Iliad. Achilles' own mortality is vital to the story. Overall, this movie does a great job in conveying the core themes of the Iliad. It is a masterfully crafted retelling of the myth. 9 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you on the battlefield.